And so we come to video 8 in our series. In the series, I Lost Everything and Then. Energy economy, why you're exhausted by a life that looks fine from the outside. I want to describe a specific kind of exhaustion. Not exhaustion that comes from working too hard or sleeping too little. Not the exhaustion that arrives after genuine effort and resolves after genuine rest. A different kind, subtler, more persistent, more confusing. The exhaustion of a life that looks fine, where the job is good enough, the relationships are functional, the schedule is manageable, nothing is dramatically wrong. And yet you end most days feeling hollowed out in a way that a full night's sleep doesn't fix, that a vacation doesn't fix, that more productivity or less productivity doesn't fit. You look at your life from the outside and it looks sustainable. From the inside, it feels like running a car with a slow leak in the fuel tank. Covering ground, getting things done, but something is draining that shouldn't be draining, and you don't know where the leak is. That experience, which is far more common than most people admit out loud, is almost never a time management problem. It's almost never a motivational problem. And it's also never solved by working less or resting more. It is an energy economy problem. The economy of your life, the specific distribution of what builds your capacity versus what consumes it, is misaligned. You spend more than you're generating, not in money, in the fundamental resource that money, time, and effort all depend on. Call it energy, call it life force, call it capacity. The specific word matters less than the recognition that it is real, it is finite, and the current economy of your life is either building it or depleting it. Most people have never looked at their life through this lens, not honestly, not with the specificity that would make the map actually useful. That's what this video is. So let's look at what energy actually is. Before we map the economy, I need to establish what we're actually talking about when we say energy. Because the word carries a lot of baggage, spiritual, pseudoscientific, motivational, that I want to be precise about and where necessary, set aside. I'm not talking about energy in the physics sense, joules, calories, thermodynamic system, though the metabolic components is real, and we'll touch on it. I'm not talking about energy in the New Age sense, auras, vibrations, chakras. If that framework is useful for you, I'm not arguing against it. But it's not what I'm working with here. What I mean by energy in the context of the energy economy framework is this: the quality and the quantity of your available capacity to engage with your life fully and deliberately. Not just to function, to engage, to be present, to bring yourself, your attention, your creativity, your care, your authentic response to what's in front of you. That capacity is real. It fluctuates, it can be built, it can be depleted, and it is the actual resource that everything else you're trying to do depends on. Here's why this definition matters. Most productivity and wellness framework focus on time as the primary resource. There are only 24 hours in a day. Manage them well, protect them fiercely. But time is not the binding constraint for most people. You can have enormous amount of protected time and still produce nothing of consequence, still feel hollow, still be going through the motions of life rather than actually living one. Because time without capacity is just duration. The binding constraint is capacity, and the capacity is generated and depleted by specific conditions. Conditions that vary significantly from person to person, and that most people have never mapped honestly. There's a philosophical lineage behind this framework, work acknowledged and briefly. Taoism described Jing, vital essence, and the condition that preserves or dissipated. Your Vedic medicine described prana, life force, and the practices that build or deplete it. Stoic philosophy distinguished between actions that are ketophysm, according to nature, energy generating, and those that are contrary to nature, energy depleted. Modern psychology contributes ego depletion research, which demonstrates that self-regulation draws on a limited cognitive resource. And more recently, research in psychological capacity, the composite of hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism, demonstrates that these resources are finite and renewable, not fixed traits. Different frames, same underlying observation. There's a resource. It matters. It can be mapped. Most people are running their economy without ever having looked at the map. Now let's look at how the economy breaks down. Energy economies don't break down suddenly. They break down gradually through an accumulation of small misalignments that compound over time until the deficit becomes undeniable. Here's how it typically happens. Phase one, the inherited economy. Most people's energy economies were not designed. They were assembled from obligation accepted without examination, from roles taken on without full consent, from the accumulated weight of what was expected rather than what was chosen. The career that made sense given your background and what your family needed you to become. The relationship dynamic that felt familiar because it resembled the first relational economy you ever lived in. The social obligations, the professional commitments, the daily structure, assembled piece by piece over years without anyone ever asking, does this build or deplete? The inherited economy is not always misaligned. Sometimes people luck into an economy that generally sustains them. But for most people, at least some significant component of their current energy economy was assembled by forces other than their own genuine preferences and values. Phase two, the maintenance tax. Once an economy is established, even a misaligned one, it requires energy to maintain. The job that depletes you requires energy not just to do, but to keep going, to keep showing up, to keep performing. Engagement you don't feel, to keep suppressing the signals your body is sending about the misalignment. The relationship dynamic that doesn't fit requires energy to manage, to navigate around the friction, to maintain the version of yourself that the relationship requires. The maintenance tax is invisible until it isn't. Until the total cost, doing the thing plus maintaining the thing plus suppressing the signals about being the thing exceeds the available supply. Phase three, the deficit spirals. When expenditure consistently exceed generation, the system enters deficit. In deficit, everything costs more. The things that were merely depleting becomes exhausting. The decisions that were manageable becomes overwhelming. The relationships that were functional becomes intolerable. And paradoxically, the thing that would generate the creative work, the genuine rest, the nourishing relationship become harder to access because access to them require a baseline of capacity that the deficit has consumed. The person in deep energy deficit often can't do the things that would help them because they don't have the energy to begin. And that's the spiral. It's the reason that willpower, discipline, and motivation based solutions don't work on an energy economy problem. You can't willpower your way out of the structural deficit. The structure has to change. So let's look at the 4 primary drains. Energy drains are not all the same. They operate through different mechanisms and require different responses. Here are 4 primary categories. Drain 1, misalignment drain. This is the most significant drain and the most systematically underestimated. Misalignment drain is the energy cost of operating in chronic tension with your actual values, genuine preferences, and authentic self. It doesn't feel like effort. It feels like a vague, persistent flatness, like going through the motions, like being present in the body, but absent in some more essential way. The career that is competent but joyless. The relationship that is functional but not nourishing. The daily life that is organized around what looks good rather than what actually sustains. Every hour spent in significant misalignment costs more than the hour itself because a part of your system is continuously working to suppress the signal, the persistent internal awareness that this isn't right, this isn't yours, this isn't where your actual life is. Suppressing that signal is extraordinarily expensive, and it runs continuously below the surface of whatever else you're doing. Misalignment drain cannot be solved by working less. It can only be solved by reducing the misalignment, which is slow, complex work. But it's the only work that can address the root. Drain number 2, relational drain. Not all relationships are created equal in your energy economics. Some relationships leaves you feeling more alive, more present, more like yourself after spending time in them. Those are generators. We'll come back to that. Some relationships consistently leave you feeling depleted, diminished, or somehow less than when you arrive. Those are drains. The drain isn't always about conflict. Some of the most draining relationships are the ones that require you to maintain a performed version of yourself, where being real is either unsafe or unwelcome. And the cost of constant performance is what drains you. Some are draining because they are fundamentally extractive. One person's needs, one person's crisis, one person's reality consuming the available space reliably and without reciprocity. Some are draining because the dynamic requires you to suppress your own perception, to consistently doubt your own experience, minimize your own need, override your own signals in service of maintaining the relationship equilibrium. Relational drains are particularly difficult to address because they're wrapped in obligation, history, love, and the genuine complexity of real relationships. The solution is really simple and almost never just cut this person out of your life. But the first step is honest accounting. This relationship consistently leave you more depleted than before. Not occasionally, consistently. That pattern is information the economy requires you to look at. Now let's look at drain number 3, decision drain. Every decision costs energy, including especially that decisions that never get made. The open loops, the deferred choices, the unresolved situations sitting in the background of your awareness, consuming processing capacity without ever completing. The conversation you haven't had, the decision you keep approaching and backing away from, the situation you're managing around rather than addressing directly. Open loops don't wait patiently in a holding area somewhere. They run as background processes continuously, drawing on the same cognitive and emotional resources that everything else in your life depend on. This is the cognitive science of ego depletion made practical. Every unresolved decision, every maintained ambiguity, every avoided confrontation is a tax on the system's available capacity. Closing loops generates energy, not because the decision is always pleasant. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it costs you something real. But because the background processing stops, the resource it was consuming becomes available. Decision drains is one of the most actionable drains to address. The inventory of open loops is often shorter than it feels, and the energy return on them is often faster and more significant than people expect. Drain number 4, environment drain. The physical and the social environments you inhabit have a direct and measurable effect on your energy economy. Light, sound, and spatial organization, the quality of air and nature access, these are not trivial variables. Research in attention restoration theory demonstrate that certain environments actively restores cognitive capacity while others deplete it. The built environment, the digital environment, the social environment, all exert continuous influence on the available supply. Most people have never audited their environments for energy economies. They have made choices about where they live, work, and spend time based on cost, convenience, social expectation, and habit, not based on honest assessment of what those environments do to their capacity. Open office plan that provides no cognitive refuge. The home that never feels restored because it's organized around presentation rather than the actual habitation. The digital environment that creates a continuous low-grade state of alert, comparison, and fragmentary attention. Environment drain is often the easiest drain to partially address. Small changes in physical environment, light, sound, order, access to nature, can produce energy returns disproportionate to the effort required. The digital environment, especially the relationship most people have with their devices, their feeds, their always-on connectivity, is one of the most significant and most unexamined drains in the contemporary energy economy. Not because technology is inherently depleted, because most people's relationship with it is structured around the maximum stimulation rather than the actual restoration. Now, let's look at the 4 primary generators. Generators are the conditions, activities, relationships, and states that build your capacity rather than consuming it. They're not the same for everyone, and this is important. The self-help and the wellness industry has produced a large volume of generic prescriptions about what should generate energy. Morning routines, meditation, exercise, gratitude journaling. Some of those work for some people. None of them work for everyone. And the framework of energy economy is not about installing a generic system. It's about honestly mapping what actually generates for you, which requires inquiry and honesty, not just adoption of someone else's protocol. With that caveat, here are the four primary categories of generators. Generator one, aligned activity. The word, paid or unpaid, professional or personal, that produces energy rather than consuming it. Not because it's easy. Aligned activity is often difficult, but there's a specific quality to the difficulty of work that's genuinely yours. It's engaging rather than draining. It pulls your attention towards it rather than require your attention to be forced towards it. Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow state describes this phenomenon with precision. Flow, the state of complete absorption in a challenging activity that matches your skill set, is not just productive, it's restorative. People in flow states report that feeling more alive, more present, more themselves than in almost any other condition. The question is not what you're good at. The question is what generates when you do it. What leaves you with more capacity rather than less, even when it's difficult, even when it takes time, even when it's hard. That's your aligned activity. And your energy economy needs regular, sustained doses of it. Generator two, nourishing relationship. This is the relational counterpart to relational drain. The specific people, not many, usually in whose presence you feel more like yourself. Where the conversation requires no performance, where your actual experience is welcome and doesn't require management, where you leave feeling present, more energized, more alive than when you arrive. The specific people, not many, usually in whose presence you feel more like yourself, where the conversation requires no performance, where your actual experience is welcome and doesn't require management, where you leave feeling more present, more energized, more alive than when you arrive. These relationships are not always the most prominent ones in your life. They are not always the ones most visible or more socially significant, but they are irreplaceable components of a functioning energy economy. The research on social connection and well-being is unambiguous. Quality of relational connection is one of the most robust predictions of both psychological well-being and physical health. Not quantity, quality. The specific quality of being genuinely known and genuinely received. Your economy needs these relationships, and it needs them to be protected in time, in attention, in the deliberate choice to prioritize depth over breadth. Generator three, genuine rest. Not all rest generates. This is one of the most common confusion in the energy economy conversation. Passive consumption, scrolling, watching. The default state of contemporary digital life is not rest in the generative sense. It is low intensity stimulation. And it may not be as depleting as active work, but it's not building capacity. It's at best a pause. Genuine rest is a condition in which the system actually restores. For most people, that means some combination of sleep, of adequate quality and duration, physical stillness without screen input, engagement with nature, unstructured time without agenda, and the specific activities, creative, physical, contemplative, that have a restorative function for that particular person. These activities vary. The function is consistent. Genuine rest builds the supply. Passive consumption maintains it at best, and at the edges of excess, depletes it. Your economy needs genuine rest, not as a luxury, as a structural maintenance of the generating capacity that everything else depends on. Generator 4, meaning and coherence. This one is harder to operationalize, but impossible to ignore. The sense that what you're doing matters, not in a grand capital M meaningful way necessarily, but in the quieter sense of coherence. That your daily life is connected to something you actually value. That you're moving in a direction that is genuinely yours. That the expenditure of your time and energy is going towards something worth going toward. The absence of meaning and coherence is one of the most significant and most under-recognized energy drains that exist. Viktor Frankl, writing from the extreme context of the concentrating camps, observed that the capacity to survive and the maintenance of psychological function was closely related with the capacity to find a meaning, not comfort, not pleasure, not ease, meaning. In ordinary life, the absence of meaning rarely presents an existential crisis. It presents as that specific exhaustion I described at the beginning of this video, the hollowness behind a life that looks fine, the flatness behind a schedule that is full. The energy economy cannot be rebuilt without addressing the meaning and the coherence component, which is why this framework connects back to every other framework in this series, the identity work, the pattern work, the void phase. They are all in some sense about recovering access to what actually matters to you, which is the foundation of a genuinely generative energy economy. Mapping your actual energy economy is the most important practical step in this entire framework. And it requires a specific kind of honesty that most people initially resist. Because the map you're making is not the life you wish you had or the life you're trying to build. It's the life you actually have right now, the actual distribution of what is building and what is depleting. That map is sometimes uncomfortable to look at. Do it anyway. The mapping process. Set aside 90 minutes. Do this once seriously before trying to change anything. Step 1, list every significant recurring element of your current life. Not a time audit, an energy audit. List the people, activities, environments, obligations, and patterns that make up the regular texture of your existence. Be specific. Not work, but the specific components of your work. The meetings, the particular projects, the specific professional relationship, the environment. Not family, but the specific dynamics, the specific people, specific recurring interactions. Aim for 20 to 30 items. More if necessary. The more specific the list, the more useful the map. Step 2. Rate each item. For each item in the list, assign one of 3 ratings. Generates. This consistently leaves me with more capacity than before, more alive, more present, more able to engage with my life. Neutral. This neither builds nor depletes in any significant way. It's part of the background of my life without particular energy consequence. Depletes. This consistently leaves me with less capacity than before, more hollow, more flat, more removed from my actual self. Rate it quickly. The first honest response before the rationalizing mind engages. The rationalizing mind will want to upgrade several of the depleters. It's not that bad. It has its moment. It's necessary. Note these upgrades and then go back to the original rating. Step 3. Look at the ratio. What percentage of your significant recurring life elements are in each category? Most people doing this honestly for the first time are surprised and usually not pleasantly by the ratio they find. The life looks fine from the outside, but often has an energy economy that is somewhere between 60 and 80% depletion, with a generating element clustered in small corners of the map. That ratio is not sustainable indefinitely. The slow leak will eventually become a crisis, usually at a point where the accumulated deficit has made resilience impossible. The map shows you the structure before the crisis, which is far preferable to after. Step 4. Identify the single highest cost depleter. Not all depleters are equal. One or two items on your list are likely responsible for a disproportionate share of your total depletion. The chronic misalignment at work. The relational dynamic that costs more than everything else combined. The chronic misalignment at work. The relational dynamic that costs more than everything else combined. The open loop that has been running for years. The environment you have stopped noticing, but that is draining you continuously. Identify it specifically without rationalizing it into something more manageable than it actually is. The item is the primary leverage point in your economy. Not the only one, but the one where change would produce the most significant return. Step 5. Identify the single most underinvested generator. Step 5. Identify the single most underinvested generator. Something on your generating list or something not on your list at all that you know generates for you is receiving less investment than it warrants. The creative work you keep deprioritizing. The nourishing relationship you keep meaning to make more time for. The genuine rest practice you know works and that keeps getting crowded out by the obligation. Identify. That's the primary leverage point. One primary depleter to reduce. One primary generator to increase. Those two moves pursued honestly and consistently over 3 to 6 months produce more change in the energy economy than a complete life overhaul attempted at once. Now let's look at how we can rebuild honestly, rebuilding honesty. Rebuilding an energy economy is not dramatic. It's not a sudden reorganization of your entire life. It is a slow, honest, deliberate reallocation of investment away from the highest cost depleters towards the highest return generators. Here's what that looks like in practice. The principle of minimum viable depletion. The principle of minimum viable depletion. For every significant depleter in your energy economy, there's a minimum viable version of that obligation. The version that meets the genuine requirement without the excess cost of the performance version. The job that depletes can often be done in a way that reduces depletion by reducing the performance, by negotiating different conditions, by bringing more honesty to the role and less management of how the role appears. You're not always able to remove the depleter entirely. You're almost always able to reduce its cost by removing the performance component. The energy cost of doing the thing and the energy cost of performing enthusiasm for the thing are not the same. The first is often manageable. The second compounds the first significantly. Minimum viable depletion. Do what is genuinely required. Remove the performance of more that is genuinely required. The principle of protected generation. Generators don't protect themselves. In a misaligned economy, they are consistently the first things crowded out by the depleters, which are louder, more urgent feeling, more socially reinforced. The creative work doesn't send a calendar notification. The nourishing relationship don't escalate the demand. The genuine rest doesn't create a crisis if it doesn't happen today. The depleters do all those things, which is why, without deliberate protection, the generators disappear from the economy entirely. Protected generation means scheduling your generators with the same non-negotiability as your highest priority obligations. Not when there's time. There will not be time. Before there's time, block it, protect it, honor it. This will feel wrong initially. It will feel like prioritizing what seems optional over what seems essential. That feeling is the misaligned economy defending itself. The generators are not optional. They are the supply side of the entire system. The principle of honest accounting. Every 3 months, not daily, not weekly, return to the map. What has shifted? What was a high cost depleter that has been partially, what generators has been successfully protected and is producing return? What new depleter has appeared that wasn't on the original map? Honest accounting is not self-improvement tracking. It is not looking for evidence of a progress to feel good about. It is looking at the actual current state of the economy with the same honest clarity you brought to the original map. The economy is not static. It changes. The people, obligations, and activities in your life changes. What was a generator 5 years ago may now be neutral. What was neutral may have become a depleter as circumstances shifted. The accounting keeps the map current, and the map has to be current to be useful. Now, let's look at the hard cases. The energy economy framework has specific hard cases that deserves direct address. Hard case number 1. Obligations that cannot be reduced. Some depleters are genuine obligations that cannot be negotiated down or removed without costs that aren't acceptable. The caregiving responsibility, the financial necessity, the family situation that requires what it requires regardless of the energy economies. The framework doesn't pretend these don't exist. The honest response to a genuine non-negotiable depleter is twofold. First, stop spending energy fighting it. The resistance to a non-negotiable reality costs energy on top of the thing itself. Accepting the genuine constraint clearly and without drama stop the second order cost. Second, increase the generation proportionally. If a significant portion of your economy is occupied by a non-negotiable depleter, The generating side of the equation needs deliberate investment to compensate, not to balance perfectly. Perfect balance may not be available, but to maintain enough supply that the deficit doesn't spiral. Honest accounting in this situation is about finding the generators that are both available, given the constraints, and genuinely generative. Not the aspirational generators you have in a lifetime, the ones available in this one. Hard case number 2, not knowing what generates. Some people, particularly those who have been in energy deficit for an extended period, have lost reliability, access to what actually generates for them. The deficit has been running long enough so that the generators feel inaccessible or unreal. This is a real condition. It is not permanent. The way back to knowing what generates is through small experiments rather than direct inquiry. The direct question, what gives me energy, often produces no answer in deep deficit. The nervous system is too depleted to recognize the signal. Small experiments, spend 1 hour doing something you used to find generative before the deficit deepened. Notice the quality of what you feel during and after, not whether it solved the problem, whether anything shifted, however subtly. That signal, however faint, is the generator reasserting itself. Follow it, not with dramatic investment, with small, consistent, protected time. Generators remember themselves when given the conditions to do so. Hard case number 3. When the primary depleter is a relationship you love. This is the hardest case. The relationship that costs more than it returns, but that you don't want to leave, can't leave, or genuinely love despite the depletion. The energy economy framework doesn't resolve this complexity, it clarifies it. Seeing clearly that a significant relationship is a net depleter while also being genuinely valued, genuinely loving, genuinely important doesn't produce a simple answer, but it does produce an honest question. Is the depletion structural, built into the dynamic in a way that could potentially change? Or is it intrinsic to the relationship in a way that won't? Structural depletion can sometimes be addressed through honest conversations, change patterns, renegotiate dynamics. Intrinsic depletion, where the relationship requires something that is fundamentally at odds with your actual nature, is a harder truth that eventually requires a harder decision. The framework can show you which one it is. What you do with that information is yours to decide. So let's bring this to a close. I'm going to close with something that took me a long time to understand about the energy economy framework. The goal is not maximum efficiency. That distinction matters because the default application of any resource management framework in this culture is optimization. Extract maximum output from available input, eliminate waste, run lean. That's not what this is. A human life is not a production system. And the goal of mapping your energy economy is not to produce more from the same supply. It's to align the economy with what actually matters to you, so that the capacity you have is going toward the life you're actually trying to live. Some of the most important things you can do with your energy don't produce measurable output. Genuine rest, deep conversation, sitting with a question that has no answer yet, being present with someone you love without agenda. These aren't inefficiencies in the economy. They are the economy's purpose. The map is not a prescription for your maximizing productivity. It's a tool for seeing clearly and honestly whether the way you're spending your one finite supply of capacity is aligned with what actually matters to you. That alignment, slow, honest, imperfect, always unfinished, is what the energy economy framework is pointing towards. Not a productive life, a more genuinely inhabited one. The difference between those two things is not small. It is in some sense everything. There's a line from the poet Mary Oliver that I come back to when I think about this work. She asks what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. Not your most optimized life, not your most impressive life, not the life that photographs best or the one that makes the most sense on paper. Your one wild and productive life. The energy economy is the map of where that energy is actually going. Look at it honestly and then slowly, deliberately, and with more patience and urgency, begin to point it towards actually yours. Next in this series, the identity layers dive deep into what it actually means that your sense of self is constructed in layers, which layers are generally yours and which were inherited or performed, and the specific practice of working through them towards something more honest underneath. Link above. Take care of yourself.